Students across the country are continuing to call for reform in their education system, including racial equality at private institutions. Students and alumni have created Instagram accounts that share the experiences of Black students at these predominantly white schools. On the fourth day of our Black at Private Education and Race series, we spoke to Dr. Howard Stevenson, a clinical psychologist and professor at the University of Pennsylvania. He explained the lasting impact racial encounters have on Black students.
We're seeing a lot of students in these private schools discussing how they feel attacked, how they feel isolated and discriminated against. Walk us through how they describe some of those experiences and what sort of lasting impact do these interactions have on a student's mental health?
Well, thank you for the question. When we studied Black students in independent schools in the mid to late 90s, much of what they told us then is what we're hearing and seeing in the comments on these posts. Many of these students were in predominantly white settings, and they felt very concerned at the time of what was happening to them, but they were not able to connect always the stress and trauma related to those events, not only because they were outnumbered. In many cases, they really didn't feel like they could share it with anyone. And over time, what we've learned is that as stress and trauma around race has impacted us in many respects, we are reminded of past traumas. And in many respects, these platforms have been ways for some young folks to actually express the pain from those past experiences.
Yeah, and a lot of what we're seeing with sort of the Black at movement, we're hearing a lot from kids who are no longer in high school, and, I think a little bit of distance gives you more perspective on what you experienced, and you may not realize that you're experiencing something racist because, it doesn't look like what you expect. And what I'm talking about is microaggressions. And people will hear the phrase microaggression, but I don't think they really understand what it means. So can you kind of explain what that is and why, because of the nature of a microaggression, even the victim of that microaggression may dismiss it as something else other than racism?
Yes. So some of the work that's being done on this now, primarily by Dr. Darrell Sue out of Teachers College, Columbia University, they're basically slights. They're subtle, sometimes thought of as minimalist statements or gestures that would appear harmless to some, but they're not always intentional. Sometimes they are intentional, but in many respects, they still traumatize people of color when they have to navigate, should I speak to these moments or should I not? And the stress of minimizing my own experience of racism, or by speaking up, could I be identified as somebody playing a race card of sorts? The pressure is sort of a catch-22. I'm damned if I speak up and I'm damned if I don't. And what I hear now is some people saying, I wish I had spoken up then. And so racial microaggressions happen all the time. And I think the best strategy is speaking to it in the moment, to hold the person accountable. Whether they're intentional or not is secondary to the impact that it has on one's heart, body, mind, and soul.
Black students also say that they have to deal with what they claim is a prejudicial education system, a variety of punishments, including suspensions, law enforcement. How do these larger issues compound some of the microaggressions students face, and what impact does that have on their education?
Well, there are several connections. One of them is sort of the sense that by being the brunt of jokes or even side comments, you are thought of as inferior as a human being. And so it's a dehumanizing experience. And that is simply the same kind of drama that's happening in policing that goes awry, or in educational experiences that go awry. The notion that you could be somehow treated differently because you happen to be Black or brown is still a part of that element. There's another level of which those who are in charge or who are responsible as professionals or educators or police or protectors, they're not held accountable. And so the combination of both the dehumanization as well as the sense that when I speak up, you're not held accountable for these actions, intentional or not, that is also compounding the stress and trauma. And it hampers, that same sense we talked about. Should I or should I not speak up about this dehumanization?
Yeah, and we should point out that, sort of biasness in the system is not a perception. There have been a number of studies that have concluded that African American children are more likely to face disciplinary action for the same infractions that white children do and don't face disciplinary action. At least one study said 4 times more likely. So it's not a figment of their imagination. I want to ask you about something you teach, socialization, racial socialization. You teach that to both Black and white kids. Explain what it is and why it's important that both Black and white kids get that education.
Well, so racial socialization is basically the ways in which parents, and we thought of primarily parents, communicate to their children about how to navigate the politics of race in our society, and usually includes both the what and the sort of how of talking to children about race. The what is the content, what should we be sharing informational-wise around racial politics, and then the how is sort of like the preparation. How do we prepare our children for these racial moments? It so happens that Black and brown and white parents do communicate about race, even if they don't say anything, because their nonverbals are just as powerful to children. So racial socialization can come not only from parents, can come nonverbally or verbally, but it can also come from social media, teachers, and authority figures in our world.
So what are the repercussions of not adding the study of racism into a school's curriculum?
Well, it's sending a message. So it's a kind of racial socialization to ignore racism that's happening outside of the school and not inside the school. And so in so many respects, children learn that their lives are not as important as other people's lives. They're learning about what they go through daily is not a part of the curriculum. And so schools can enhance the sense of belonging that children have in schools, which is we know is very basic to learning and to achievement, is by including all of their experiences, whether they're tragic or hard to talk about. As long as they can be a part of the curriculum in almost every topic you can imagine, those children are going to feel more belonging. And back to your earlier point, we know that some of these same attitudes around or lack of knowledge around racism also contributes to our disciplinary actions. That we don't see that we're actually treating children of color very differently in these settings, not only related to discipline, but also related to connection and belonging.
So the school that my daughter goes to sent out a list for summer reading, and they included a list with diverse characters, and they also included a separate list that deals with sort of race relations. And when I looked at that list, I thought it was good, but I also thought to myself, we are probably among the handful of families that would seek out a book on this list if we don't already own it. And I thought, how does a school encourage then the parents of kids who are not minorities to seek out this knowledge? In a way, like, how do you sort of convince them that there's something in it for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think part of our work, when we think about not only racial socialization, we call it racial literacy, and that's the ability to read, recast, and resolve racially stressful encounters. Everybody has racially stressful encounters, but we don't talk about race enough in our society to become skilled at what to do when those moments happen. Some of us freak out. And you could argue that white children, as well as anyone else, are going to struggle through these racially stressful moments and make bad decisions. We think, in many respects, parents of white children ought to be just as concerned if we understand that racial stress not only affects what you know about race in the world, it affects your body, it affects your thoughts, and it affects your feelings. And so, in many respects, all parents should be concerned that not navigating race is an impact on one's health. And that health notion is very important, I think, if we want all children to grow up wise and healthy, knowing how to navigate these racially stressful moments, which will come for everyone, right? Particularly white children who have friends of color and they don't know what to do or say when they witness their friends going through oppression. Everybody should be talking about this.
Dr. Howard Stevenson, thank you so much. Absolute pleasure talking to you.
Same here. Thank you.